Okay, get ready, because today we're going to look at something pretty huge. Like, this is a global power struggle that could really change the world as we know it.
Yeah, this one is a biggie.
We're talking about the BRICS nations:
Oh, yeah. That.
Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and their plan to take on the U.S. dollar. They're basically saying, hey, world, there's a new kid on the block.
Right.
And, this has some massive implications. So in this deep dive, we're going to unpack three major points.
Okay, sounds good.
First up, why are the BRICS even challenging this financial giant in the first place?
Good question.
Then we'll check out former President Trump's reaction. He threatened 100% tariffs. Was he serious?
Wonder.
And finally, we'll explore what a world with a less powerful dollar might actually look like for you and me.
That's the question everyone's asking.
So let's dive into this economic earthquake and see what we uncover.
All right, let's do it.
All right, so why are the BRICS nations really going after the U.S. dollar's dominance? What's the big motivation here?
Well, it's like they're saying enough is enough. They're tired of playing by the rules set by those Western institutions.
You mean like the International Monetary Fund?
Exactly. They want more control over their own economies and a bigger say in how the whole financial system works.
So it's like they're graduating to the big leagues, demanding a seat at the grown-up table.
Precisely. And they're not just talking about it, they're taking real action to back up their ambitions.
Like what kind of action? What are they actually doing?
Well, for starters, they're expanding their club.
Oh, right. More countries are joining them.
Yeah, just recently, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the UAE joined up. Shows you it's becoming pretty appealing, especially to countries looking for alternatives to how things are run now. But even more interesting is this BRICS Pay thing they're developing.
BRICS Pay? Is that like their version of Apple Pay or something?
It's bigger than that. Think of it as a rival to SWIFT, the system used for international payments now. If this BRICS Pay thing takes off, it could really weaken the dollar's power. Imagine businesses and countries using a BRICS system to buy and sell things, completely bypassing the dollar. That's the end goal here.
Wow, okay, that's a bold move. I see why former President Trump wasn't exactly thrilled about it. He threatened to hit those countries with a 100% tariff if they tried to ditch the dollar, right?
Yeah, he did. He certainly wasn't happy, but whether he'd have actually gone through with it, well, that's debatable. Some experts, like Josh Lipsky and Rugank Pusari from the Atlantic Council, weren't so sure about how effective that would have been.
Trump wasn't shy about using tariffs. Remember that 25% tariff on Colombian coffee, trying to change their migration policies? Coffee lovers around the world felt that one.
Yeah, that one backfired a bit. It's a good example of how tariffs can have unexpected consequences. Often hurting the very people they're supposed to protect. American consumers ended up paying more for their coffee.
Right. So even if Trump's 100% tariff threat was more talk than action, this whole BRICS thing raises some big questions. Could the U.S. actually afford to cut ties with these countries economically?
That's where things get tricky. The reality is the U.S. and the BRICS are deeply connected, especially with China. We depend on them for a ton of stuff. Untangling ourselves from that wouldn't be easy or cheap.
Let's break that down a bit. First up, China. What are some of the key imports that we're really reliant on?
Think about what you use every day. Smartphones, computers, even the batteries that power them. In 2023 alone, 76% of smartphones and 78% of portable computers sold in the U.S. came from China, and a whopping 70% of those lithium-ion batteries. Those are essential for everything from electric vehicles to those little portable chargers. We get most of them from China.
Those numbers are mind-blowing. It's like we're totally hooked on China's manufacturing.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
And it's not just tech gadgets. Think about those toy aisles overflowing with options. Well, 77% of the toys we import are from China. And for the gamers out there, 87% of video game consoles are made in China.
So a trade war with China could mean a lot of unhappy kids and adults come Christmas time. It's not just toys and tech, though, right? This affects businesses and the entire economy.
Absolutely. Businesses that rely on those imports would be in a tough spot. Imagine suddenly running out of computer chips, or the price of those essential batteries skyrocketing. It would disrupt everything, dried up costs, and consumers would end up paying more.
Yeah, that's a pretty grim picture. And it's not just China, right? We have significant economic ties with the other BRICS countries, too.
That's right.
No.
Let's take Brazil, for example. In 2022, the U.S. invested a lot of money in Brazil, mostly in manufacturing, finance, and insurance.
That's a lot of money going back and forth.
Yeah.
What about the goods we get from Brazil?
Brazil has a big trade surplus with the U.S. when it comes to mineral products, metals, and machines. So any disruption in trade with Brazil would impact both sides quite a bit.
So it seems like a trade war with Brazil would also have major consequences.
Hmm.
What about India? They've been a rising economic star for a while now.
Absolutely. And U.S.-India trade is booming. We're talking nearly $192 billion in trade in 2022. We import a lot of different things from India: pharmaceuticals, gems, and jewelry, even marine products.
So India's a big player in those sectors. Any chance of tariff trouble there?
Well, in 2025, former President Trump did threaten tariffs against India, along with other countries. He wanted India to buy more American-made military equipment and move towards what he considered fairer trade practices.
So there was definitely some tension there. What about the other BRICS countries, Russia and South Africa?
Things are complicated with Russia because of the sanctions, but historically the U.S. has relied on them for a lot of its mineral fuels, oils, and precious metals. As for South Africa, they're another big trading partner. We import things like precious metal compounds, iron, and steel even beverages.
Okay, so we've talked about the original BRICS members, but there's one more to add to the mix. Indonesia. They joined the BRICS this year, right?
Yep, Indonesia is a major supplier of palm oil, rubber tires, and footwear to the U.S., and their exports to the U.S. have been increasing steadily for the past few years.
So Indonesia's becoming a bigger player in global trade, and their economic ties with the U.S. are getting stronger. This BRICS bloc is shaping up to be a real force to be reckoned with.
Definitely something to watch closely. It's not just about economics, though. It's about a shift in global power dynamics. The BRICS expansion and their challenge to the U.S. dollar, it's all part of a move towards what's called a multipolar world.
A multipolar world. Okay, I'm intrigued. Break that down for me. What exactly does that mean?
Think of it this way. For decades, the U.S. has been like the main actor on the world stage, calling most of the shots. But in a multipolar world, power is spread out among different groups of countries, not just concentrated in one place.
So it's less like a solo act and more like an ensemble cast where everyone has a role to play.
Exactly. And the BRICS are trying to position themselves as a leading force in this new world order.
This is all getting very interesting, but before we get too carried away, let's pause here and unpack this whole concept of a multipolar world a bit more.
Sounds good. Let's delve into that. All right, so you wanted to dive deeper into this multipolar world idea.
Yeah, exactly. It's a term we hear a lot these days,
Oh,
but it can sound kind of vague and confusing.
I get it. It can sound pretty academic.
Can you explain it in simple terms? Like, what does it actually mean?
Sure. Basically, a multipolar world means power isn't concentrated in one place, like it has been with the U.S. for the past few decades.
Right.
Instead, power is spread out among different groups of countries, each with their own goals and priorities.
So instead of one superpower calling the shots, we'd have several powerful players all competing for influence.
Exactly. In a multipolar world, no single country can dictate the rules. Everything would require more negotiation, compromise, and considering different perspectives.
Sounds like things could get pretty messy, but maybe also more dynamic and interesting.
Exactly. It would be a much more fluid and unpredictable world, with shifting alliances and a constant power struggle between the major players, kind of like a big game of chess.
I like that analogy, a multiplayer chess game. So
Yeah.
how does this multipolar world idea connect to the BRICS challenge to the U.S. dollar? Is this their ultimate goal?
It's a big part of their strategy. By creating alternatives to the current U.S.-dominated system, the BRICS want to speed up this shift towards a multipolar world. It means depending less on the U.S. and having more influence for themselves and other countries.
So are we talking about a world where the dollar is completely replaced? Gone for good?
I doubt the dollar will disappear completely. It's been the world's reserve currency for a long time. It's woven into the fabric of the global financial system, but it's totally possible that its power will gradually decline as other currencies gain acceptance and trust globally.
So more like a power-sharing arrangement than a complete takeover.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. Imagine the global economy as a pie. Right now, the US dollar has the biggest slice, but in a multipolar world, that slice would shrink. And other currencies, like the Chinese yuan or a potential BRICS-backed currency, would take up more space.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture, but why is this happening now? What's driving this shift towards multipolarity?
There are a few things at play. One is the rise of emerging economies. Especially in Asia, China, India, and other BRICS nations have seen huge economic growth in recent decades. They're becoming major players in global trade and investment, and they want their influence to match their economic power.
It's like you're saying, hey, we're here, and we deserve to be taken seriously.
Exactly. Another factor is the perceived decline in U.S. influence on the world stage. The U.S. has been involved in costly and long wars, and its economy has faced its own challenges. Some argue this has weakened its global standing and created an opportunity for other countries to step up.
And we can't forget about the growing backlash against globalization. A lot of people are questioning whether the current system really benefits everyone.
That's right. There's a feeling, especially in developing countries, that the current system is rigged against them. They're looking for alternative models of development and want more control over their own destinies.
So the BRICS challenge to the dollar is just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. It's both a symptom of this shift toward a multipolar world and a catalyst pushing it forward.
Exactly. If the BRICS can successfully create a real alternative to the dollar-dominated system, it could completely reshape the global financial landscape and really speed up this transition.
Okay, so we've got this seismic shift happening, and the BRICS are playing a key role. But what does it all mean for the average person? Should we be worried?
Remember, these changes tend to happen gradually. It's not going to happen overnight, but they will have an impact on our lives eventually.
Like what kind of impact?
Well, if the dollar loses value compared to other currencies, it could make imported goods more expensive. We're already seeing this with inflation. A weaker dollar means those products made overseas cost more for us to buy.
So that new phone or that fancy coffee maker could end up costing more.
Possibly. And it's not just about consumer goods. A weaker dollar can affect investments and savings, too. If the dollar's value drops, your investments might be worth less, and your savings won't buy as much.
Not good news for people saving for retirement or a rainy day.
It's a risk to consider. But a multipolar world also has potential opportunities. As other economies grow and gain influence, it could open up new markets for U.S. businesses and investors. A more diverse and interconnected global economy could create more opportunities for growth and innovation.
So it's not all bad news. There are potential downsides, but also potential benefits to this power shift.
Exactly. It's a mixed bag. And the outcome depends on how these shifts are managed. If countries cooperate, negotiate, and find common ground, a multipolar world could be a positive thing, leading to more balanced and sustainable global growth.
But if things go badly and countries become more protectionist and selfish, we could be in trouble.
That's right. Conflict and instability are always risks in a multipolar world, where power is more spread out and the rules aren't as clear. It's a reminder of how important diplomacy and dialogue are, and finding ways to work together on shared challenges.
Okay, so we've talked about the big picture implications of a multipolar world. Now let's zoom in on the BRICS themselves. What's attracting so many countries to this bloc? What's the appeal?
We touched on this earlier. The BRICS offer an alternative to the current system, which is seen as Western-dominated. For many countries in the global south, especially those that feel marginalized, this is a big draw. They see the BRICS as a way to have their voices heard, promote their interests, and have a say in shaping global rules.
It's about having more control over their own destinies instead of being dictated to by powerful Western institutions.
Exactly. And the BRICS are actively creating alternative financial institutions, like the New Development Bank and the Contingent Reserve Arrangement. These institutions offer support to developing countries without the same strict conditions as traditional institutions like the IMF and World Bank.
So it's not just about ditching the US dollar. It's about building a whole new system that works for them.
That's the idea. Whether they'll succeed is still up in the air, but they're definitely gaining momentum. The BRICS are growing in size and influence, and they're challenging the very foundation of the global order.
That's ambitious. But are they really up to the task? Can such a diverse group with sometimes competing interests actually make this work?
That's the big question. The BRICS are a diverse group with different political systems, economic structures, and sometimes even conflicting goals. Getting them all on the same page is a huge challenge.
Sounds like herding cats.
Kind of. But they've also shown they can cooperate and find common ground. Their shared desire to reshape the global order and create a more equitable system for all members. That could be a strong unifying force.
Okay, so there's potential, but also lots of uncertainty and hurdles to overcome.
That's the nature of this transition. We're in uncharted territory. It's impossible to predict how things will unfold, but it's important to understand the forces at play, the different actors' motivations, and the potential consequences of this shift toward a multipolar world.
Well said. Now let's look at another key player, multilateral institutions. We've talked about how the BRICS are challenging the existing order. But what about the institutions that have been the cornerstones of that order for decades?
This is where things get really interesting. Multilateral institutions like the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, and the International Monetary Fund. They've been central to global governance for decades, designed to promote cooperation, manage disputes, facilitate trade, and foster economic development. But they're facing increasing scrutiny and pressure to change.
Sounds like they're struggling to keep up with this rapidly changing world and the rise of new powers like the BRICS.
That's right. They're facing a number of challenges, from the rise of populism and nationalism to the increasing gridlock in global decision-making. There's a growing feeling, particularly among developing countries, that these institutions are outdated, ineffective, and biased towards developed countries. They're seen as relics of a bygone era when the West had all the power.
So the BRICS and other countries are looking for alternatives, institutions that are more representative and responsive to their needs.
Exactly. They're calling for reforms to give developing countries more voting power and influence within these institutions. But they're also creating their own parallel institutions, like the BRICS-led New Development Bank we talked about earlier. These new institutions offer an alternative for financing and development assistance, with less stringent conditions and a greater focus on cooperation between developing countries.
So is this the beginning of the end for these traditional institutions? Are we watching the old world order crumble?
I don't think they'll disappear completely. They still have a lot of influence and play a vital role in many areas. But they definitely need to adapt and reform if they want to stay relevant in a multipolar world. They need to become more inclusive, transparent, and responsive to the needs of a wider range of countries, not just the traditional Western powers.
Otherwise, they risk becoming irrelevant and sidelined as new powers emerge.
That's the risk, and it would be a loss for everyone. These institutions, despite their flaws, have played a crucial role in promoting peace, stability, and progress globally. We need them now more than ever to address shared challenges like climate change, pandemics, and poverty. But they need to evolve to meet the demands of a changing world.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. We've talked about the BRICS challenging the U.S. dollar, the move towards a multipolar world, the motivations behind BRICS expansion, and the challenges facing those traditional institutions.
It's a complicated web of economic and geopolitical forces, all happening against a backdrop of rapid technological advancements, climate change, and growing inequality, which makes things even more complex.
It's a lot to take in. But it's crucial to understand these dynamics because they're shaping the world we live in and will continue to do so in the years to come.
Absolutely. These trends and transitions will affect all of us, whether we realize it or not. It's not just about abstract geopolitical maneuvering. It's about the future of our economies, our societies, and our planet.
All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into this whole BRICS situation and the potential for a multipolar world.
We've talked about why this challenge is happening, the possibility of power being more spread out globally, and the pressure on existing global institutions. Now let's try to imagine what the future might hold.
Okay, let's play what if for a minute. What are some possible scenarios for this whole U.S. dollar versus BRICS thing?
Well, one possibility is that the U.S. manages to stay on top, adapt to the changing world, but still hold on to its position as the leading power. The dollar remains the world's main reserve currency, and the current global order, maybe with a few tweaks, stays in place.
So basically, things stay pretty much the same.
Yeah, more or less. This scenario would probably involve the U.S. being more proactive, maybe even a bit tougher in global affairs, strengthening alliances with key partners, and using both carrots and sticks to maintain its influence.
Sounds like a high-stakes game of strategy, trying to keep everything under control.
That's a good way to put it. It would require skillful diplomacy, smart economic moves, and maybe even a little bit of risk-taking to stay in the lead.
Okay, so that's one possibility. What else could happen?
Another possibility is a more gradual and peaceful shift towards a multipolar world. The dollar's dominance slowly fades as other currencies, like the yuan or maybe a BRICS-backed currency, become more widely used. Global power becomes more balanced, with several centers of influence emerging and competing.
So instead of one superpower calling the shots, it's more like a team effort, but with everyone trying to be the team captain.
Yeah, something like that. This scenario would require a lot of negotiation, compromise, and cooperation among the major players. It's a delicate balancing act, with the potential for both conflict and collaboration.
It sounds like a more complex and dynamic world, with a lot of moving parts and constant adjustments needed.
Exactly. It wouldn't be a predictable system, which could be both challenging and exciting.
Okay, so we have a scenario where the U.S. stays dominant and one where there's a gradual shift to a multipolar world. Is there a third option? Like, what's the most dramatic scenario you can imagine?
The most dramatic, but probably the least likely, scenario is a sudden and disruptive shift in the global order. Imagine a massive economic crisis that rocks the global financial system, a huge geopolitical conflict that shatters existing alliances, or a combination of events that accelerates the decline of the dollar and creates a power vacuum.
Okay, now that sounds like total chaos and uncertainty, a real game changer.
It would be incredibly volatile and unpredictable, with potential consequences for everyone. While this scenario is less likely, it's not impossible, especially in a world that's increasingly interconnected and facing multiple risks.
So basically, the future is a big question mark. Lots of different paths we could take, each with its own set of challenges and opportunities. What will determine which path we end up on?
That's the big question. Several factors will play a role. The strength and resilience of the U.S. economy and its ability to adapt is one. Another is the unity and effectiveness of the BRICS bloc. Can they overcome their differences and work together? And then there's the role of other countries and regions, like the European Union, the Middle East, and Africa. What choices will they make? Will they side with the U.S., the BRICS, or go their own way?
It's a global game of strategy, with everyone making moves and trying to stay ahead.
Exactly. And the outcome is uncertain. It will depend on a complex mix of economic, political, and social factors, as well as the choices made by various actors on the world stage.
Okay, we've talked about possible scenarios and what might influence the future.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about the potential risks and opportunities in this multipolar world. What's the best case scenario? And what's the worst case scenario?
The risks. A multipolar world could lead to more competition for resources, trade wars, unstable currencies, and geopolitical instability as different power centers fight for influence and control. There's also the risk of a return to old-school power struggles, with the U.S., China, and others engaging in a winner-takes-all game that undermines global cooperation.
Sounds like a world where everyone is suspicious of each other and only looking out for themselves.
It's a real concern, but a multipolar world also presents opportunities. It could lead to a more balanced and fair global system where power is more evenly spread and emerging economies have more say in shaping the rules.
So it's not all bad news. There's potential for a more inclusive world order.
Exactly. A multipolar world could encourage more innovation and cooperation as countries are encouraged to work together to solve shared problems. It could also lead to more diverse and resilient economic relationships as countries reduce their reliance on any single currency or trading partner.
So both potential downsides and potential benefits. The outcome depends on the choices countries make and how they choose to interact with each other.
Exactly. It's a reminder that the future isn't set in stone. It's shaped by our decisions and actions. A multipolar world could be more peaceful, prosperous, and equitable, but it will require a commitment to dialogue, cooperation, and a willingness to compromise.
Okay, we've covered a lot in this deep dive. The BRICS challenge to the US dollar, the potential for a multipolar world, the risks and opportunities, and the challenges facing traditional institutions.
Yeah.
But let's bring it back to the individual listener. Why should they care about all of this? How does it affect their lives?
This isn't just some abstract geopolitical game. It has real implications for our daily lives. It could affect the prices we pay for things, the value of our savings, job opportunities, and even the security and stability of our nation and the world.
So it's not just about economics or international relations. It's about our future and the kind of world we want to live in.
Exactly. It's important for everyone to be informed about these global trends, understand what's happening, and engage in constructive dialogue about how we can navigate this changing world and shape a future that benefits everyone.
Well said. So, as we wrap up, what's the key takeaway you want our listeners to remember? What's the message you want them to think about?
Here's something to consider. This whole situation with the US dollar, the rise of the BRICS, and the shift towards a multipolar world. It's about more than just economics or geopolitics. It's a battle for global power, but it also reflects a deeper change happening. It's about who sets the rules, who benefits, and whose voices are heard in shaping the future.
That's a powerful thought, and it gives us a lot to consider. As the BRICS become stronger and the global landscape keeps changing, the big question is, will the future be a multipolar world with a more balanced and fair financial system? Or will the U.S. hold on to its economic power? We'll have to wait and see.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the BRICS, the US dollar, and the changing face of global power. It's been a fascinating and thought-provoking conversation. We hope you've learned something valuable along the way.
And that's a wrap for today. Thanks for listening.